Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten back roads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. In the vast expanse of the Navajo Nation, where ancient traditions meet the modern world, there exist tales that challenge our understanding of reality. These are stories of encounters with beings that defy explanation, entities known in the Diné language as Ye Nald Lushi, or, with it, he goes on all fours. In English, they are called Skinwalkers. These accounts come from law enforcement officials, park rangers, families, and individuals who have experienced something that cannot be easily dismissed. The Navajo people rarely speak of these entities, believing that acknowledging them gives them power. Yet the encounters continue, documented in official reports and whispered in hushed conversations. What follows are 6 verified accounts of encounters with what can only be described as skinwalkers, beings that walk between worlds, capable of taking animal form and bringing misfortune to those who cross their path. Now, let us begin with our first story. Hundreds of miles away, in the small community of Kayenta, another family was about to discover that some objects carry more than their physical weight. The Begay family had lived on their ancestral land for generations, maintaining a small sheep farm that provided both sustenance and connection to their traditional way of life. In the spring of 2015, while repairing a section of fence line that bordered the canyon, 17-year-old Jason Begay discovered something unusual half buried in the red dirt, a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be animal hide, tied with sinew. Despite his mother's warnings about disturbing unfamiliar objects on their land, Jason's curiosity overcame his caution. He untied the bundle carefully, revealing a collection of items that seemed out of place in the desert. A small, carved bone knife, a lock of what appeared to be human hair braided with crow feathers, and a smooth stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Jason took the objects home, placing them on his dresser as curious artifacts from the land. The first disturbances began subtly 3 days after Jason brought the objects home. The family's sheep, normally placid and easy to manage, grew agitated, refusing to enter the barn at night and gathering in a tight cluster in the center of the pasture. Jason's younger sister, 8-year-old Najoni, began waking up screaming from nightmares, though she could never remember what had frightened her. Jason's mother, Louise, noticed that the food in their pantry spoiled more quickly than usual, and a strange, sweet smell like decay and sage began to permeate the house, strongest in Jason's room. Louise, who had been raised with traditional Navajo teachings, grew increasingly concerned, asking Jason repeatedly where he had found the objects. He showed her the location, and her face grew pale as she recognized it as an area known to be used for ceremonial purposes by those who practiced what she called the old ways that should have been forgotten. The disturbances escalated over the following weeks. One evening, while Jason was doing homework at the kitchen table, he looked up to see a figure standing at the edge of the property line, half hidden by the trees. It appeared to be a tall man dressed in dark clothing, but when Jason blinked, it seemed to change shape, becoming something with the head of a coyote and the body of a human. He rubbed his eyes, and the figure was gone. When he mentioned it to his mother, she immediately contacted her brother, a traditional medicine man living in Shiprock. The uncle arrived the following day with herbs and prayer bundles, performing a cleansing ceremony that seemed to help for a short time. But the respite was temporary. A week later, Jason woke to find strange tracks in the dirt outside his window, not human or animal, but something in between, with 5 long toes and what appeared to be claws. The family's dog, usually friendly and protective, refused to enter the yard, whining and hiding under the porch whenever night fell. The climax of the family's ordeal came on a moonless night in late June. Jason was awakened by a tapping sound on his window, rhythmic and persistent. When he finally gathered the courage to look, he saw a face pressed against the glass, a face that was almost human, but with eyes that glowed yellow in the darkness and teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. The figure grinned, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, then raised a hand that ended in claws rather than fingers. Jason screamed, bringing his parents running to his room. By the time they entered, the figure was gone, but 3 deep scratches marred the window screen, as if something had tried to claw its way inside. The next morning, Jason discovered the objects he had found were missing from his dresser, though his window had been locked from the inside and there was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. The Begay family contacted the Navajo Nation Police Department the following day. Officer Dale Tso, who had served the community for over 20 years, documented their report, case Yanmer 15-2874, but seemed unsurprised by their account. "These things happen," he told them quietly, "especially when sacred objects are disturbed." Tso recommended they contact a medicine man for a proper ceremony, advice that Louise had already taken. The family's uncle returned with 2 other medicine men, performing a ceremony that lasted through the night. They burned sage and cedar, sang protective songs, and created a barrier of corn pollen around the property. At dawn, they told the family that whatever had attached itself to the objects was gone, but warned that Jason might still be vulnerable, as he had been the one to disturb the bundle. They gave him a small leather pouch to wear around his neck, filled with protective herbs and a small piece of turquoise. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal for the Begay family. The sheep settled back into their routine, Nijoni's nightmares ceased, and the strange odor disappeared from their home. Jason, however, remained changed by the experience. He became quieter, more observant, and often glanced over his shoulder as if expecting to see something behind him. 3 months after the incident, while checking the fence line where he had found the bundle, he discovered that the objects had returned, lying in the same spot where he had first found them. This time, he left them untouched, marking the location and informing his uncle. The medicine men performed another ceremony, this time at the site, and carefully rewrapped the bundle before leaving it in place. They told Jason that whatever was contained in those objects was now balanced, but that he would always carry a connection to it. To this day, Jason keeps the protective pouch around his neck, and the family maintains a respectful distance from the area where the bundle was found. The official police report remains open, classified as Unexplained Phenomena, with a note from Officer Tso suggesting the family avoid the area where the objects were discovered. The Begays never spoke of the incident outside their family, following the traditional Navajo belief that speaking of such things gives them power. It was early November of 2017 when long-haul trucker Raymond Mitchell picked up a load of electronics in Phoenix bound for Denver. His route would take him north through Flagstaff, then east on Highway 160 through the Navajo Nation, a shortcut he had taken dozens of times in his 15 years as a commercial driver. Mitchell, a 53-year-old father of 3 from Oklahoma, knew these roads well, including the stretches where cell service disappeared and radio reception grew spotty. He left Phoenix at 4 p.m., planning to drive through the night and make his delivery by morning. The first few hours of his journey were uneventful, the desert landscape gradually giving way to the painted hills of Navajo country as darkness fell. By 8:30 p.m., he was approaching the small community of Tuba City, his headlights cutting through the darkness as his truck rumbled along the 2-lane highway. The weather was clear, though a cold wind had picked up, occasionally gusting strong enough to push against his rig. Mitchell stopped in Tuba City for coffee and fuel, checking his route on the map before continuing east. The next significant town would be Kayenta, about 80 miles away, a stretch of highway that crossed some of the most remote territory in Arizona. As he left the lights of Tuba City behind, the darkness seemed to deepen, the only illumination coming from his headlights and the occasional distant ranch light. It was around 9:45 p.m. when he first noticed something unusual. a figure standing on a ridge to the north of the highway, silhouetted against the starry sky. At first glance, it appeared to be a person, possibly a hitchhiker, though no one ever hitchhiked this stretch of road at night. As Mitchell drew closer, he could see that the figure was unusually tall and thin, and it seemed to be watching his approach with an unnerving stillness. When his headlights passed directly by it, Mitchell got a clearer view and felt a chill run down his spine. The figure was not human, its proportions were wrong, with limbs that seemed too long for its body, and it stood with a posture that was neither fully human nor fully animal. Most disturbing were its eyes, which reflected his headlights with a yellow glow that seemed almost luminous in the darkness. Mitchell accelerated, wanting to put distance between himself and whatever he had just seen, telling himself it was just a trick of the light and distance. Approximately 20 miles further down the highway, Mitchell encountered something that defied rational explanation. As he rounded a curve, he saw what appeared to be a large animal in the middle of the road, something that looked like a coyote but was nearly the size of a wolf. He slowed his truck, preparing for the animal to move, but it remained fixed in the center of his lane, watching his approach with an unnerving stillness. When he was within 100 yards, the animal did something that made Mitchell's blood run cold. It rose onto its hind legs, revealing a height that must have been at least 6 feet, before dropping back to all fours and loping off the road with an unnatural gait. Mitchell gripped the steering wheel, his heart pounding as he accelerated past the spot where the creature had been. He reached for his CB radio, wanting to alert other drivers, but when he tried to transmit, all that came through was static, despite the radio having worked perfectly just minutes before. The air in the cab of his truck suddenly grew cold, though the heater was running at full blast, and a strange smell like ozone and burnt sage filled the air. The most terrifying part of Mitchell's journey occurred as he approached the steep grade known as Black Mesa, a section of highway that climbed through rocky terrain with sheer drops on one side. It was now 11:20 p.m., and Mitchell was anxious to put this stretch of road behind him. As his truck climbed the grade, he noticed a pair of lights in his rearview mirror headlights that seemed to be following him despite there having been no other vehicles for miles. The lights maintained a consistent distance behind him, neither falling back nor attempting to pass. Mitchell tried to get a better look at the vehicle, but the lights were unusually bright, almost blinding in his mirrors. As he reached the crest of the mesa, the lights suddenly disappeared, though there were no turnoffs or places where a vehicle could have gone. Mitchell breathed a sigh of relief, thinking whatever had been following him had turned back, but his relief was short-lived. As he began the descent on the other side of the mesa, he saw something standing on the shoulder ahead, a figure that appeared to be half human, half coyote, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. It raised what appeared to be a human arm, though it ended in claws rather than fingers, and beckoned to him as if signaling him to stop. Mitchell did not stop. He pressed the accelerator to the floor, his 18-wheeler groaning in protest as he sped past the figure. As he passed it, he heard a sound that would haunt him for years, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to pierce through the cab of his truck, a sound that was neither human nor animal, but something in between. When he looked in his rearview mirror, the figure was gone, but the headlights had reappeared behind him, closer this time, almost tailgating his rig. The truck began to shake violently, as if something were trying to force it off the road. Mitchell gripped the steering wheel with both hands, fighting to maintain control as his truck swerved toward the edge of the highway. He could see the drop-off just feet away, a sheer cliff that fell hundreds feet into darkness. Just as he thought he would lose control, the shaking stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and the pursuing lights vanished once again. The air in the cab returned to normal temperature. The strange smell dissipated, and his CB radio crackled back to life with a driver asking if anyone had traffic information for the Flagstaff area. Mitchell did not respond, too shaken to speak. He drove the remaining miles to Kayenta without incident, though he kept checking his mirrors every few seconds. Mitchell stopped at the all-night truck stop in Kayenta, parking his rig and going inside for coffee, his hands still trembling as he held the cup. The attendant, an older Navajo man, noticed his distressed appearance and asked if he was all right. Mitchell, feeling foolish but needing to tell someone what had happened, described the encounters on the highway. The attendant listened patiently, then nodded slowly. "You saw one of them," he said quietly. "A skinwalker. They sometimes walk the roads at night, looking for travelers. You're lucky you didn't stop." The attendant explained that these beings were powerful witches who could transform into animals, and that they often preyed on those who traveled alone at night. He advised Mitchell to stay at the truck stop until daylight, warning that the skinwalker might still be waiting for him out on the highway. Mitchell, who had never been a superstitious man, found himself taking the advice, parking his truck in a well-lit spot and trying to rest in the sleeper cab until dawn. He did not sleep, instead reliving the encounters in his mind. The glowing yellow eyes and the inhuman shriek burned into his memory. Mitchell continued his journey at first light, completing his delivery in Denver that afternoon. On his return trip, he took a different route, adding hours to his journey but avoiding the Navajo Nation highways. He filed an incident report with his company, describing what he had encountered, though he left out the more supernatural elements, simply stating that he had been followed by an unidentified vehicle and had seen what appeared to be a large animal on the road. The report was filed away without further investigation. Mitchell never drove that route again, and within 6 months he had changed careers, leaving long-haul trucking for a local driving job that kept him close to home. To this day, he cannot drive on remote highways at night without checking his mirrors compulsively, and the sight of a coyote near the road is enough to make his heart race. The Navajo Nation Police Department has no record of Mitchell's report, and the truck stop attendant who spoke with him that night has since retired and moved away. The only evidence of Mitchell's terrifying journey remains in his own memory, and the brief incident report filed with his former employer, a document that describes a few strange occurrences on a November night but fails to capture the true horror of what he encountered on that dark highway through Navajo country. In the remote community of Tiknos, located in the northeastern corner of the Navajo Nation, the Charlie family had lived for generations, maintaining a traditional lifestyle that connected them to the land and their cultural heritage. In the summer of 2019, 35-year-old Emma Charlie noticed that something was wrong with her 12-year-old son, Tyler. It began with nightmares that left him screaming and soaked in sweat, then progressed to periods of unexplained silence where the normally talkative boy would stare into space for hours, unresponsive to his mother's voice. Emma tried conventional medicine first, taking Tyler to the clinic in Shiprock, where doctors ran tests but found nothing physically wrong with him. They suggested it might be stress or anxiety, recommending counseling and possibly medication. But Emma, raised with traditional Navajo beliefs, suspected something else entirely, something that Western medicine could not address. She had seen similar symptoms before, in her grandfather and later in her own mother, both of whom had been described by medicine men as carrying something that did not belong to them. Emma's concerns grew when Tyler began drawing strange symbols and making marks on the walls of his room with charcoal from the wood stove. The symbols were not childish scribbles, but intricate designs that resembled no known Navajo patterns or symbols that Emma recognized. Tyler could not explain where he had learned them, saying only that they come to me when I sleep. He also developed an unusual aversion to certain traditional objects in their home, particularly the medicine bundles that Emma kept for protection, screaming whenever they were brought near him. Perhaps most disturbing were the times when Emma would find Tyler standing outside in the middle of the night, staring at the full moon and speaking in a language that was not Navajo or English, but something older and harsher sounding. When she asked him about it the next day, he would have no memory of the incident, though he would complain of headaches and a strange taste in his mouth, like metal and dust. After 3 months of escalating symptoms and no improvement from Western medical treatments, Emma made the difficult decision to contact her uncle, Henry Nez, a respected medicine man living near Chinle. Henry Nez arrived at the Charlie home on a cool September evening. bringing with him an assortment of traditional tools and materials for diagnosis and healing. He spent the first hour simply observing Tyler, who sat quietly on the floor, occasionally glancing up at the older man with an expression that seemed almost defiant. Henry then began the diagnostic process, using crystals and prayer feathers to assess the boy's spiritual condition. What he found confirmed Emma's worst fears. "There is something attached to him," Henry told Emma privately, speaking in Navajo so Tyler could not understand. "Not an ordinary sickness. This is Yenaldlushi. A Skinwalker has marked him." Henry explained that Tyler must have encountered something or someone during his daily activities, perhaps while playing in the canyons near their home, or during one of his walks alone in the evening, that had left him vulnerable to a Skinwalker's influence. The marks on the wall, the strange language, the aversion to protective objects, all were signs that Tyler had been claimed by a Skinwalker who intended to eventually take him completely. The treatment Henry recommended was intensive and would require the family's full cooperation. It began with a traditional ceremony performed that night, during which Henry used sacred herbs, prayer, and the sound of his rattling gourd to try to separate whatever had attached itself to Tyler. The ceremony lasted for hours, with Tyler becoming increasingly agitated as it progressed. At one point, he spoke in the strange language again, his voice deeper and harsher than his own, saying something that made Henry's face grow pale. When Emma asked what Tyler had said, Henry simply shook his head. "It is not for you to know." The ceremony concluded with Henry creating a protective circle of cornmeal around Tyler's bed and giving Emma a small pouch of herbs to hang around her son's neck. "This will help," he said, "but it may not be enough. The Skinwalker that has marked him is strong. It has been watching him for some time." Henry advised Emma to keep Tyler close to home, to not let him wander alone in the canyons or stay out after sunset, and to bring him to Henry for additional ceremonies every week until the attachment was broken. For the next month, the Charlie family followed Henry's instructions, with Emma or her husband always accompanying Tyler when he went outside to play or collect firewood. The ceremonies with Henry seemed to help. At first, Tyler's nightmares became less frequent, and he stopped drawing the strange symbols on the walls. But the improvement was temporary. By the third week of October, Tyler's symptoms returned with greater intensity. He began sleepwalking, sometimes found miles from home in the early morning hours, with no memory of how he had gotten there. Emma's husband, John, discovered Tyler one night standing at the edge of a nearby canyon, speaking to someone or something in the darkness below. When John called his name, Tyler turned slowly, his eyes reflecting the moonlight with an unusual yellow glow, and said in a voice that was not his own, "He wants to come home with me." John grabbed Tyler and carried him back to the house, where the boy collapsed into a deep sleep, waking the next morning with no memory of the incident. That same day, Emma contacted Henry again, this time asking him to stay with them for an extended period. Henry arrived with 2 other medicine men, bringing with them materials for a more intensive ceremony that would last for 3 days. The ceremony required the family to vacate their home, which the men purified with sage and cedar before beginning their work. Emma and John stayed with relatives nearby, checking in periodically but not interfering with the ceremonies. On the second night, around midnight, the relatives' home lost power, and as Emma stepped outside to check the breaker, she saw what appeared to be a large coyote standing on a nearby hill, watching the direction of her home. As she watched, the coyote rose onto its hind legs, revealing a height and shape that was not animal, then loped away into the darkness with an unnatural gait. The power returned a few minutes later, though the electric company had no record of an outage in their area. The following morning, Henry emerged from the Charlie home, looking exhausted but relieved. "It is done," he told Emma. "The connection is broken, though the mark may remain. Tyler will need protection and purification for some time to come." The other medicine men confirmed that they had successfully separated Tyler from the Skinwalker that had attached itself to him, though they warned that the boy might always be somewhat vulnerable to such influences. Tyler recovered gradually after the intensive ceremony, though he retained no memory of the previous month's events. He did, however, develop an unusual sensitivity to certain places and situations, refusing to go near the canyons where he had once played and becoming agitated when the sun began to set, insisting on being indoors before darkness fell. Emma and John respected these new boundaries, understanding that their son had experienced something that had left an indelible mark on him, even if he could not consciously remember it. Henry continued to visit monthly for purification ceremonies, and Tyler wore the protective pouch Henry had given him at all times, even sleeping with it around his neck. The Charlie family never spoke of what had happened to anyone outside their immediate circle, following the traditional Navajo belief that discussing such things could give them power or invite them back into their lives. The official medical record for Tyler at the Shiprock Clinic simply notes that he was treated for sleep disturbances and anxiety, with a recommendation for counseling, though no follow-up appointments were ever made. The only other documentation of the case exists in Henry Nez's private records, kept in the traditional way rather than in any formal system, a collection of observations and treatments recorded in a mixture of Navajo and English, noting that the boy was marked by one who walks between worlds, but the connection was broken before the crossing was complete. To this day, the Charlie family maintains a protective routine of ceremonies and prayers, and Tyler, now a teenager, still avoids certain areas and situations without always remembering why, only knowing that some places are not safe for him, and that darkness brings things that should not be invited in. The Navajo Nation Department of Emergency Services Dispatch Center in Window Rock handles thousands of calls each year, ranging from routine medical emergencies to reports of crimes and accidents. But among the logged calls in the system, one from October 2018 stands out as particularly unusual not because of what was reported, but because of what was recorded during the call. Dispatcher Maria Martinez, a 12-year veteran of the department, was working the night shift on October 17th when she received a call at 11:42 p.m. from a man identifying himself as Robert Wilson, a truck driver who had pulled off to the side of Highway 264 near the community of Ganado. Wilson's voice was shaking as he reported that his truck had broken down and that he was seeing something outside his vehicle that he couldn't explain. Martinez began the call following standard protocol, asking for Wilson's location, the nature of his emergency, and whether he was in immediate danger. What followed was a conversation that would later be transcribed and analyzed by multiple officials, none of whom could fully explain what had occurred. The call began normally enough, with Wilson providing his location and explaining that his engine had died and would not restart. Martinez assured him that a tow truck had been dispatched and would arrive in approximately 45 minutes. She then asked if there was anything else he needed assistance with, at which point Wilson's voice grew more hesitant. "There's something out here," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Something watching me." Martinez, accustomed to callers who were frightened by being alone on remote roads at night, asked if he was seeing animals or other people. "Not animals," Wilson replied. "Not people either. I don't know what it is." Martinez could hear heavy breathing on the other end of the line and what sounded like Wilson shifting position in his truck cab. "It was standing by that tree over there when I first noticed it," Wilson continued. "I thought it was a person at first, but it's too tall, too thin, and the way it moves, it's not right." Martinez asked if the person was approaching his vehicle, and Wilson said no, that it seemed to be content to watch from a distance. "Its eyes," he added suddenly. "They glow, like a coyote's eyes in the headlights, but brighter, yellow." For the next several minutes, Wilson described what he was seeing, his voice growing increasingly panicked. The figure, he said, had moved closer, revealing details that made no sense. "It's wearing some kind of dark clothing, maybe animal skins, but its arms and legs are too long. And its face, it's like a person's face, but with a snout, like a dog or a wolf. And the teeth, when it smiled I could see the teeth. Too many of them, too sharp." Martinez, maintaining her professional composure, asked Wilson to lock his doors and remain in his vehicle until help arrived. "I already did that," Wilson replied. "But I don't think the doors will matter. I think it could get in if it wanted to." At this point, Martinez could hear a scratching sound on Wilson's end of the line, which Wilson identified as something clawing at the passenger side door of his truck. "It's right outside," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's looking at me through the window. Its eyes, they're not normal eyes. There's something wrong with them." The scratching continued for several seconds, then stopped abruptly. What happened next was recorded not only in Martinez's log, but also on the emergency call recording system, creating a permanent record of the strange events that unfolded. At 11:51 p.m., approximately 9 minutes into the call, Wilson suddenly gasped, and Martinez could hear what sounded like a window shattering. "It's in the truck!" Wilson shouted. "It's inside!" This was followed by a struggle, the sounds of Wilson breathing heavily, and a strange clicking or chittering noise that did not sound human. Then, at 11:52 p.m., Wilson's voice suddenly changed, becoming deeper and resonant with an odd quality that seemed to echo slightly. "He is fine now," the voice said. "He does not need assistance." Martinez, startled by this sudden change, asked who was speaking. "A friend," the voice replied. "We are just talking." Martinez asked to speak with Wilson directly, and the voice responded, "He cannot speak right now. He is listening." This exchange continued for another minute, with Martinez attempting to ascertain Wilson's condition while the strange voice provided evasive answers. At 11:54 p.m., the call ended abruptly when the line went dead. Martinez immediately dispatched Navajo Nation police officers to Wilson's location, informing them of the unusual nature of the call and expressing concern for Wilson's safety. Officers Frank Yazzie and Brenda Begay arrived at the scene approximately 20 minutes after the call ended. What they found only deepened the mystery. Wilson's truck was parked on the shoulder of the highway as he had described, the driver's side door open and the engine cold. The passenger side window was shattered, with glass scattered on the seat and floor. But Wilson himself was nowhere to be found. The officers searched the area thoroughly, finding no footprints other than their own and Wilson's, which led from the driver's side door to the rear of the truck and then simply stopped. There were no signs of a struggle beyond the broken window, no blood, no drag marks, and no indication of which direction Wilson might have gone. The truck's cargo was intact, and Wilson's wallet and phone were still in the cab. The only unusual detail the officers noted was a series of strange scratches on the passenger side door and roof of the truck, as if something with claws had attempted to gain entry. The search for Robert Wilson continued for the next 2 weeks, involving multiple agencies including the Navajo Nation Police Department, the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and the FBI. Wilson, a 42-year-old truck driver from New Mexico, had no known connections to the area and no reason to disappear voluntarily. His family, when contacted, confirmed that it was completely out of character for him to abandon his truck and vanish without contacting anyone. The most significant development in the case came on the 4th day of the search, when a group of hikers discovered Wilson's CB radio approximately 2 miles from where his truck had been found. The radio was still functional, though its antenna was bent and its casing scratched as if by animal claws. When the hikers turned it on, they were startled to hear a voice speaking in an unknown language, followed by what sounded like Wilson's voice saying, "Tell them I'm fine. I'm with friends now." The hikers reported this discovery to the search teams, who recovered the radio and documented the strange transmission. The official search for Robert Wilson was called off after 17 days, with the case remaining open but inactive. The Navajo Nation Police Department's final report, Case Number 18942, lists Wilson as a missing person, noting that the circumstances of his disappearance remain unexplained, and that no definitive evidence of foul play or voluntary departure has been discovered. The report does make note of the unusual emergency call, describing it as containing elements that defy conventional explanation, and noting that the voice heard at the end of the call does not match the caller's known voice patterns. Martinez, the dispatcher who took the call, was interviewed multiple times by investigators and underwent a psychological evaluation, all of which confirmed that she had accurately reported what she had heard. She continued to work as a dispatcher for another year before requesting a transfer to a less stressful position, citing the Wilson call as a factor in her decision. "I've taken thousands of calls over the years," she told her supervisor in her transfer request, "but I've never heard anything like what I heard that night. Sometimes I still hear that voice when it's quiet." 5 months after Wilson's disappearance, a truck driver passing through the area reported seeing a man matching Wilson's description standing on a ridge overlooking Highway 264. When the driver stopped to offer assistance, the man simply smiled and waved before turning and walking away into the desert. The driver reported this sighting to authorities, noting that there was something not right about the man's eyes, which he described as yellow and glowing in the sunlight. Officers searched the area but found no sign of anyone. Wilson has never been officially located, and his case remains one of the most unusual in the Navajo Nation's missing persons files. The recording of his emergency call is kept in a sealed file at the Department of Emergency Services, accessible only to senior officials. Those who have heard it describe it as deeply unsettling and inexplicable, noting the strange quality of the voice that took over the call and the unidentifiable language that could be heard in the background. The official explanation remains that Wilson either wandered off into the desert and succumbed to the elements, or was the victim of an unknown assailant, though neither theory adequately explains the strange events of that October night or the words spoken by the voice that took over his call. "He is fine now. He is with friends." Dr. Eleanor Vance, a 38-year-old archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, had been working on a dig in the Navajo Nation for 3 summers when she made a discovery that would change the course of her research and, ultimately, her life. The dig, located in a remote canyon near the community of Mexican Springs, focused on ancestral Puebloan sites from the 13th century. Vance and her team had spent weeks carefully excavating a small cliff dwelling, documenting pottery shards, tools, and other artifacts that provided insight into the lives of the ancient inhabitants. It was on a hot July morning in 2019 that Vance uncovered something unusual, a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be deerskin, hidden in a crevice beneath the floor of one of the dwellings. The bundle was carefully preserved despite its age, and when Vance gently unwrapped it in the field laboratory, she found a collection of objects that did not match the cultural context of the other artifacts they had discovered. The bundle contained a small carved bone knife, a lock of human hair braided with what appeared to be wolf fur, and a smooth black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Most unusual was a small piece of bark with symbols carved into it, symbols that did not match any known ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs or pictographs. Vance, intrigued by this anomalous discovery, carefully documented the objects and sent photographs to several colleagues for identification. The response she received was uniformly puzzling. None of the experts could identify the symbols or place the objects within any known cultural context. The archaeologist who specialized in ancestral Puebloan cultures suggested the items might have been introduced later, perhaps by Navajo people who had used the cliff dwelling after its original inhabitants had abandoned it. But the Navajo historian Vance consulted was puzzled by the objects, noting that while some elements appeared similar to certain traditional Navajo practices, the symbols and combination of items did not match anything he had seen before. "These are not traditional medicine objects," he told Vance, "and yet they feel old and powerful in a way that concerns me." He advised Vance to handle the objects with caution and to consider reburying them where they had been found. Vance, ever the scientist, was reluctant to do so, believing that the objects could provide important insights into the cultural history of the region. She decided to keep them at the field laboratory for further study, securing them in a locked cabinet when not being examined. The first unusual incidents began approximately 1 week after Vance had uncovered the bundle. Team members started reporting strange sounds at night, howling that sounded like a coyote but was deeper and more resonant, and sometimes what sounded like whispering just outside their tents. Vance initially dismissed these reports as misidentifications of natural night sounds or perhaps the result of fatigue and isolation. But when she herself began hearing the sounds, she grew more concerned. One night, she was awakened by what sounded like something scratching at the outside of her tent. When she shone her flashlight through the fabric, she saw a silhouette that appeared to be human, but was unusually tall and thin, with proportions that seemed wrong. The figure stood motionless for a moment, then loped away into the darkness with a gait that was neither fully human nor fully animal. The next morning, Vance found strange tracks in the dirt outside her tent, 5-toed prints with claw marks, but with a stride length that would have been impossible for any human or known animal. She made plaster casts of the tracks, noting their unusual characteristics. Though she could not identify what might have made them, the disturbances escalated over the following days. Equipment began to malfunction or disappear, only to reappear in odd locations. A compass that Vance used for mapping would spin wildly when held in certain areas of the dig site. Batteries drained inexplicably, even when not in use. Several team members reported seeing a tall, thin figure watching them from the canyon rim, though it always disappeared when approached directly. Perhaps most unsettling were the times when team members would find small piles of stones arranged in patterns near their tents. Overnight patterns that matched none of the known archaeological features in the area, but bore a resemblance to the symbols carved on the piece of bark Vance had discovered. 2 team members became so frightened that they left the dig early, citing personal reasons, though privately telling Vance they felt unwelcome and unsafe at the site. Vance, who had always prided herself on her rational, scientific approach to archaeology, found herself grappling with phenomena that defied logical explanation. The climax of the team's ordeal occurred on the night of July 28th. A severe thunderstorm had rolled in, forcing the team to take shelter in their tents as lightning illuminated the canyon walls and thunder echoed through the darkness. Around 10:30 p.m., the storm suddenly abated, leaving an unnatural silence in its wake. Vance was reviewing her notes in her tent when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a clear, high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. This was followed by what sounded like heavy footsteps running around the perimeter of the campsite, sometimes on 2 feet, sometimes on 4. Vance's team members began calling to each other through their radios, their voices panicked as they reported seeing things moving in the darkness. "There's something out here," shouted one team member. "It's not human. It's not animal." Vance grabbed her flashlight and stepped out of her tent, sweeping the beam across the canyon walls. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life, a tall, thin figure with the head of a coyote, glowing yellow eyes, and what appeared to be human-like hands, ending in claws. The figure was standing on the canyon rim, looking down at the campsite, and as Vance's flashlight beam hit it, it raised a hand and beckoned, as if inviting her to follow. Vance did not follow. Instead, she ordered her team to pack their essential equipment and prepare to leave at first light. The remainder of the night was spent in a state of heightened alert, with the team members huddled together for safety, occasionally hearing strange sounds outside their tents, but seeing nothing when they looked. At dawn, they packed up the campsite with an efficiency born of fear, leaving behind non-essential equipment in their haste to depart. Before leaving, Vance returned the bundle of objects to the crevice where she had found it, carefully rewrapping them and placing them back in their original location. As she did so, she had the unsettling feeling that she was being watched, though when she looked around, she saw nothing but the empty canyon walls. The team drove away from the dig site as the sun rose, not stopping until they had reached the main highway, leaving behind 3 weeks of work and several $1,000s worth of equipment. Vance contacted the university from the nearest town, explaining that she had made the decision to abandon the dig due to unforeseen circumstances and safety concerns. Back at the university, Vance faced difficult questions from her department head about the abandoned dig site and the equipment that had been left behind. She struggled to explain what had happened, knowing that her account would sound more like delusion than rational observation. In the end, she cited unexplained disturbances and potential vandalism as the reason for abandoning the site, though she knew this was inadequate. The university, concerned about liability and the cost of the abandoned equipment, sent a team to retrieve what had been left behind. When they arrived at the dig site, they found everything exactly as it had been left, with no signs of vandalism or disturbance. The only unusual detail they noted was that the crevice where Vance had described finding the bundle was empty, with no trace of the objects she claimed to have returned there. The team also found strange tracks in various areas of the site, similar to those Vance had documented, though they could not identify what might have made them. Their official report noted unexplained phenomena, but concluded that the site appeared safe for further investigation, though no additional work was ever conducted there. Vance never returned to the Navajo Nation for fieldwork, though she continued her academic career with a new focus on the cultural and spiritual beliefs of the Navajo people. She published a paper on ancestral Puebloan dwellings that made no mention of the unusual objects she had found or the strange occurrences that had driven her team away. Privately, however, she remained haunted by what she had experienced, occasionally waking in the night from dreams of glowing yellow eyes and inhuman shrieks. She sought out a Navajo cultural consultant who listened patiently to her story before telling her quietly that she had likely disturbed something that should have been left undisturbed. "Some things are not meant to be found," he told her. "Some places are not meant to be explored. You learned this the hard way, but you were lucky. You could have lost more than just your research." Vance never spoke publicly about what had happened at the dig site, though she occasionally shared the story with trusted colleagues, prefacing it with, "This is going to sound crazy, but I need to tell someone." The bundle of objects she discovered was never recovered, and the symbols carved on the piece of bark were never identified. The dig site remains abandoned, occasionally visited by curious hikers who report feeling uneasy there, particularly at dusk when the canyon walls cast long shadows and the desert wind begins to whisper through the rocks. Sheriff Thomas Begay had served the Navajo Nation for 23 years, handling everything from domestic disputes to homicide investigations. In all that time, he had never encountered a case quite like the one that came across his desk in November 2020. The report, filed by Deputy Maria Chi, described a call to a remote residence near the community of Crown Point, where a family had reported strange occurrences that defied explanation. The family, the Yazis, had lived in their small home for generations, maintaining a traditional lifestyle connected to the land and their cultural heritage. But in the weeks leading up to their call to the sheriff's department, they had experienced a series of disturbing events that had left them afraid to remain in their home. Begay, a practical man who had little patience for superstition, initially dismissed the report as the product of overactive imaginations or perhaps the influence of traditional beliefs about witches and skinwalkers. But when Deputy Chi returned with photographs and audio recordings, Begay found himself confronting something that did not fit within his understanding of the world. The Yazzie family's troubles had begun in early October 2020, shortly after they had discovered unusual tracks around their property. The tracks, which appeared in the morning dew on several consecutive days, were unlike anything the family had seen before: five-toed prints with claw marks, but with a stride length that would have been impossible for any human or known animal. 72-year-old Hostine Yazzie, the family patriarch, had shown the tracks to his son, who agreed that they were unusual but could not identify what might have made them. A few days after the tracks first appeared, the family's sheep began to behave strangely, clustering together in the center of their pasture and refusing to enter the barn at night. The family's dog, usually friendly and protective, began to whine and hide under the porch whenever darkness fell. The first direct encounter occurred when 14-year-old Jolene Yazzie was fetching water from the family's well at dusk. She saw what appeared to be a tall, thin figure watching her from a nearby ridge, its features obscured by the fading light, but its proportions clearly wrong: limbs too long, a head too large for its body. When she called out to it, the figure raised what appeared to be a human arm, though it ended in claws rather than fingers, then loped away into the darkness with an unnatural gait. The disturbances escalated over the following weeks. The family began hearing strange sounds at night, howling that sounded like a coyote but was deeper and more resonant, and sometimes what sounded like whispering just outside their windows. One evening, while the family was eating dinner, they heard a scratching sound on the outside wall of their small home. When Hostin Yazi went outside to investigate, he found a series of deep scratches in the adobe, as if something with claws had attempted to gain entry. The most terrifying incident occurred on the night of November the 2nd, when a powerful storm knocked out the family's electricity. As they sat by candlelight, they heard a voice speaking in a strange language just outside their window. Jolene, who had been recording the sounds on her phone as evidence, captured approximately 30 seconds of the voice before the battery died. When Deputy Chi played the recording for Sheriff Bigay, he had to admit it was unsettling, a deep, resonant voice speaking in what sounded like an ancient dialect, with an odd quality that seemed to echo slightly, as if the speaker were in a much larger space than the yard outside the Yazi home. Deputy Chi's report included photographs of the tracks, the scratches on the adobe wall, and a series of strange symbols that had appeared in the dirt around the Yazi home overnight. The symbols, which resembled no known Navajo patterns or writing, were arranged in a circle around the house, each one approximately 2 feet in diameter. Chi had photographed them from multiple angles, though she noted in her report that they seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different positions, creating an optical illusion that made her feel dizzy. Perhaps most disturbing were the photographs of what appeared to be footprints on the roof of the Yazi home, 5-toed prints with claw marks, similar to those found in the yard, but located in a place that should have been inaccessible without a ladder. The Yazis insisted that no one in their family had climbed onto the roof, and there was no ladder or other equipment that could have been used to reach it. Chi had checked the roof herself, finding no damage to the shingles or gutters that would indicate how someone, or something, had gained access. Bigay, despite his skepticism, decided to visit the Yazi property himself, accompanied by Deputy Chi and 2 other officers. They arrived in the early afternoon, finding the family huddled together inside their home, clearly frightened despite the bright sunlight. Bigay examined the evidence himself, the tracks, the scratches on the wall, the symbols in the dirt. He could find no rational explanation for any of it, though he maintained a professional demeanor, assuring the family that they would do everything possible to ensure their safety. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the property, Bigay noticed that the atmosphere seemed to change. The air grew still, the customary desert wind ceasing entirely, creating an unnatural silence. The family's dog began to whine, retreating under the porch and refusing to come out when called. It was in this silence that Bigay first heard it, a soft clicking sound, like nails on stone, coming from the ridge behind the house. The officers swept the area with their flashlights, finding nothing at first. But as Bigay's beam hit a large rock formation approximately 200 yards from the house, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat, a figure standing on the rocks, watching them with an unnerving stillness. It appeared to be a tall, thin man dressed in dark clothing, but as Bigay looked more closely, he could see that its proportions were wrong, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. When the figure raised its head, Bigay could see that its face was not human. It had the snout and ears of a coyote, but the eyes were set in a face that was almost human in its intelligence. The eyes reflected the flashlight beams with a yellow glow that seemed almost luminous in the darkness. "What in God's name is that?" whispered Deputy Chi, her voice trembling slightly. Before Bigay could respond, the figure raised what appeared to be a human arm, though it ended in claws rather than fingers, then dropped to all fours and loped away into the darkness with an unnatural gait. The officers gave chase, but the figure moved with an impossible speed. disappearing behind the rock formation despite the open terrain. Begay and his deputies searched the area for nearly an hour, finding no trace of the figure beyond a series of tracks that appeared in the sand, then simply stopped, as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. The tracks were identical to those the Yazis had described, 5-toed prints with claw marks, but with a stride length that was estimated at over 9 feet, impossible for any human or known animal. As the officers regrouped near their vehicles, they heard a sound that would haunt them for years, a high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from multiple directions at once, a sound that was neither human nor animal, but something in between. The Yazi family, who had been watching from their window, quickly closed the curtains and barricaded their door. Begay, despite his years of law enforcement experience and his reputation for fearlessness, felt a chill run down his spine. He ordered his team to return to the station, assuring the Yazis that he would post extra patrols in the area, though privately, he wondered what good it would do against something that moved with such speed and agility and seemed to defy the laws of physics. Back at the station, Begay struggled with how to document what he and his deputies had witnessed. The official report, Case Return 20-1147, described the events in neutral, professional language, noting unexplained disturbances and unidentified individuals on the Yazi property. But Begay also included a personal addendum, accessible only to senior law enforcement officials, in which he described what he had seen with his own eyes, the figure with the coyote head and human-like body, the impossible tracks, the inhuman shriek. "I have been a law enforcement officer for 23 years, he wrote. I have seen things that would shock most people, but I have never seen anything like what I saw tonight. I cannot explain it in conventional terms, though I suspect the Yazi family's traditional beliefs may offer an explanation that I, as a modern law enforcement officer, am not equipped to understand." The report concluded with a recommendation that the Yazi family be offered temporary relocation assistance, though they declined, choosing instead to consult with a medicine man about protective ceremonies. In the weeks that followed, the Yazi family reported a gradual decrease in the disturbances, though they never entirely ceased. The medicine man they consulted performed a series of ceremonies at their home, creating a protective barrier of corn pollen and sage around the property. He told them that whatever had been drawn to their home was powerful but had moved on, though he warned that it might return if they were not vigilant. The family maintained a routine of prayers and protective ceremonies, and while they occasionally still saw the tall figure watching from a distance or heard strange sounds at night, the direct encounters ceased. Sheriff Begay checked on them periodically, though he never again saw anything unusual at their property. The case remained officially open but inactive, classified as unexplained phenomena. Begay never spoke publicly about what he had seen that night, though he occasionally shared the story with trusted law enforcement colleagues, prefacing it with, "This is going to sound crazy, but I need to tell someone." To this day, he cannot drive past the Yazi property without glancing at the ridge behind the house, half expecting to see a tall, thin figure with glowing yellow eyes watching from the rocks, a reminder that even in the modern world, there are things that defy explanation and challenge our understanding of what is possible. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly in the remote expanses of the Navajo Nation, where ancient traditions meet the modern world and the boundary between what is real and what is imagined sometimes blurs. The 6 accounts we have explored tonight, the vanished park ranger, the tainted object, the highway watcher, the canyon voices, the medicine man's warning, and the sheriff's report, represent only a fraction of the encounters documented in this region. Each story, verified through official reports, witness testimony, and physical evidence, points to phenomena that defy conventional explanation. They speak of beings that move between worlds, capable of taking animal form and bringing misfortune to those who cross their path. The Navajo people have long known such beings as Yi-Naldlushi, or Skinwalkers, though they rarely speak of them, believing that acknowledging them gives them power. Yet the encounters continue, documented in police files and whispered in hushed conversations, challenging our understanding of the natural world and our place within it. What connects these disparate accounts is not just the geographic region in which they occurred, but the underlying themes that run through each story: the violation of sacred spaces, the disturbance of objects that should have remained undisturbed, the encounters with beings that defy categorization as either human or animal. In each case, there is a sense of having crossed a boundary, of having entered a realm where the rules of the ordinary world no longer apply. The witnesses in these stories, park rangers, truck drivers, archaeologists, families, law enforcement officials, are not people prone to fantasy or exaggeration. They are ordinary individuals who found themselves in extraordinary situations, facing something that their experience and knowledge could not explain. Their responses vary: some flee, some fight back, some seek help from traditional sources, but all are irrevocably changed by what they have experienced. The aftermath of these encounters is often as mysterious as the encounters themselves, with physical and psychological effects that persist long after the events themselves have passed. Perhaps most unsettling about these accounts is what they leave unexplained. In none of these stories is there a neat resolution, a satisfactory explanation that puts the events firmly in the realm of the understood. The park ranger who vanished into the desert, leaving behind only scattered belongings and a final, haunting journal entry. The objects that appeared and disappeared, defying the laws of physics and leaving behind only traces of their presence. The voices recorded in the canyon, speaking in a language that no linguist could identify. The figure with the coyote head and human body, moving with impossible speed and agility, then vanishing without a trace. These elements resist categorization, existing in the space between what we know and what we can only guess at. They remind us that, despite our scientific advancements and our rational understanding of the world, there are still phenomena that elude explanation, still mysteries that remain unsolved. The Navajo perspective on such encounters offers a framework that Western science cannot provide: a recognition that there are realms beyond the physical, forces that operate according to their own rules, and beings that exist in the spaces between worlds. From this perspective, the Skinwalker is not merely a supernatural creature or a figment of imagination, but a real entity with its own motivations and capabilities, a witch who has chosen to walk the path of harm, who can transform into animal form, who can move between the physical and spiritual realms. This understanding carries with it a set of protocols and protection ceremonies to cleanse and heal, objects to ward off harm, knowledge of what places to avoid and what actions to take when confronted by such entities. It is a wisdom accumulated over generations, passed down through oral tradition and personal experience, offering a way to navigate a world that is more complex and mysterious than our modern perspective often acknowledges. What these stories ultimately suggest is that the world is not always as it seems, that there are layers of reality that we do not normally perceive, and that there are beings that move through these layers, occasionally intersecting with our own reality in ways that can be terrifying or transformative. The witnesses in these accounts have been granted a glimpse behind the curtain of ordinary reality, and what they have seen has changed them forever. Some have been left with physical scars, others with psychological trauma that persists long after the events themselves. Some have found ways to integrate their experiences into their understanding of the world, drawing on traditional beliefs or personal resilience. Others continue to struggle with what they have witnessed, unable to find a framework that can contain the inexplicable nature of their encounters. All carry with them the knowledge that the world is more mysterious and more dangerous than they had previously believed. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The accounts we explore on Sleepless Campfire come from people like you, ordinary individuals who have experienced something extraordinary, who have witnessed phenomena that defy explanation. By sharing these stories, we create a record of encounters that might otherwise be dismissed or forgotten, building a collective understanding of the mysteries that exist at the edges of our reality. We approach each story with respect and skepticism, seeking verification where possible and acknowledging the limitations of our understanding. We do not claim to have answers, only questions that point to the vastness of what we do not know and the possibility that there are realms beyond our current comprehension. Your stories contribute to this ongoing exploration.